Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're really excited about today's topic. You're here because you want more than just surface level information, right? You want to really understand the how and the why.
Exactly. Today's deep dive is all about giving you a powerful toolkit, a way to cut through the noise and make smarter decisions. We're going deep on logical fallacies and how critical thinking can help you avoid them.
What really jumped out at us from the material was this question. How good are you at spotting bad reasoning?
Think about it. Have you ever heard arguments like, everyone who's successful wakes up at 5 a.m., or this supplement's natural, so it has to be safe, or even, if you don't completely agree with us, you're against us?
It's easy to roll your eyes at those examples, but the truth is, a lot of us fall for these kinds of logical traps all the time.
The source we're diving into today actually cites a study that found a whopping 71% of adults regularly fall for these fallacies. That's a lot.
It is, and that's why we're doing this deep dive. We want to give you the ability to spot these errors in reasoning and arm you with the critical thinking skills you need to make better decisions.
Because this isn't just about winning arguments, it's about something much bigger, making sound judgments that actually improve your life.
Exactly. This deep dive is all about understanding the very real cost of what the text calls clouded thinking and unlocking what it calls the critical thinking advantage. We're going to break down these concepts and give you practical tools you can use starting today.
Right. Because let's be honest, clouded thinking can be incredibly costly.
Yeah, really costly. The source material mentions that poor critical thinking can cost the average person over $10,000 in financial missteps alone over their lifetime. That's a pretty sobering thought, isn't it?
Absolutely. It really underscores how those seemingly small everyday decisions, the ones we make without thinking them through, can really add up over time.
Yeah, it's like those little leaks in your budget. Individually, they don't seem like much, but over time, they can drain your resources without you even realizing it.
And the text illustrates this with a really compelling story about Jaime, this successful marketing executive.
Right, Jamie. From the outside looking in, he seemed to have it all figured out. Good job, nice apartment, the whole deal. But when it came to managing his personal finances, there was a big disconnect.
He had this blind spot, and it really came down to how he approached decision-making. What were some of the red flags in Jamie's thinking?
Well, he was very impulsive. He relied heavily on gut feelings and didn't really spend much time actually evaluating information.
He didn't dig deeper.
And the big one was confirmation bias. He would actively seek out information that supported what he already believed and completely disregard anything that challenged his viewpoint.
That confirmation bias essentially created an echo chamber for him.
Exactly. And this all culminated in a pretty disastrous decision when a friend told him about this amazing cryptocurrency investment opportunity.
It was presented as this surefire way to get rich quick.
And Jamie just jumped right in, didn't
So
he?
cursed.
Instead of doing his due diligence, like, actually reading the technical documentation or trying to understand the underlying technology, he just dove into online forums and got swept up in the hype.
Anyone who raised concerns or pointed out potential risks, he just brushed them off as not understanding the transformative potential of this revolutionary new cryptocurrency. It was all very, very familiar.
It was. And it's a classic example of how confirmation bias can blind us to the bigger picture.
And the text actually breaks down several specific cognitive biases that were at play in Jamie's decision. We've already talked about confirmation bias, but there was also impulsive decision-making driven by emotion, right? Like he got caught up in the excitement.
Right. You got swept up in the excitement of it all.
And then the anchoring effect, where he fixated on those initial, possibly inflated returns his friend had mentioned.
Right. Those big promises really stuck in his mind.
And lastly, the availability heuristic, where we overestimate the likelihood of something happening just because we can easily recall a few vivid examples.
Like winning the lottery.
Exactly. Or constantly hearing news stories about plane crashes. Even though statistically car accidents are far more frequent, you might develop a disproportionate fear of flying. That's the availability heuristic at work. Our brains tend to overemphasize information that's easily recalled, often because it's vivid or recent. And in Jamie's case, it was all those success stories he was reading in online forums, even though they might not have represented the full picture.
And the thing is, it wasn't just the money he lost, was it?
No, not at all. The consequences went far beyond just the financial hit.
His partner was understandably really upset, and it put a huge strain on their relationship.
It impacted his work too. His confidence took a hit, and even his self-image as a smart and capable person suffered.
It's amazing how one bad decision based on faulty thinking can have such a ripple effect across your entire life.
Absolutely. And this is why the text offers 5 warning signs of clouded thinking. These are things you, our listener, can look out for in your own life, and they're really, really important.
Yeah, they are. So the first warning sign is seeking out only information that supports your existing beliefs,
Yeah.
like what Jamie did with the cryptocurrency.
Right. And the second one is making decisions based primarily on your feelings in the moment rather than on logic and evidence.
So letting those emotions take over.
And the third is dismissing evidence that contradicts your views without really considering it.
Just shutting it out.
Right. The fourth warning sign is rushing into decisions without taking the time to investigate properly.
Acting impulsively.
Exactly. And the fifth, and this is a subtle one, is finding it difficult to clearly articulate the reasons behind your conclusions.
So you know you believe something, but you can't really explain why.
Precisely. And it's so important to remember that this isn't about intelligence. These are cognitive biases, mental shortcuts that we all have to some degree.
Our brains are wired for them. They probably served us well in simpler times. But in today's complex world, especially when it comes to finances, they can lead us down the wrong path.
And that's why the text connects these biases to so many common financial mistakes we see. Not diversifying investments, holding on to losing investments for too long, or panicking and selling everything when the market dips.
All of those reactions are often driven by these underlying biases.
And that's why simply becoming aware of these biases, being able to recognize them in yourself, is such a crucial first step. You can't fix a problem if you don't even know it exists, right?
It's like trying to fix a leaky faucet when you're not even aware that there's a leak.
Precisely. Recognizing these biases, understanding how they work, is the foundation for developing what the text calls the critical thinking advantage.
Right. And this isn't just about avoiding costly mistakes. It's about actively making better decisions and achieving better outcomes in every area of your life.
And the core principle behind this advantage is that it's not necessarily about having the highest IQ. It's about using the best thinking you're capable of. It's a way of thinking, a deliberate approach.
It's about hitting the pause button before you react, asking yourself the right questions, and really evaluating the information you're working with.
The text gives this great example of 2 colleagues reviewing a sales report that shows declining numbers. One person, operating purely on emotion, might panic, start blaming people, or make rash decisions. But the critical thinker, they'll take a step back.
They'll look at the bigger picture.
They'll analyze the data in context, consider all the possible factors, and then come up with more targeted and effective solutions. Same information, completely different approach and outcome.
And this is especially important in today's world, where we're absolutely bombarded with information.
Constantly. The text mentions that the average person is exposed to about 34 gigabytes of information every single day.
That's like trying to drink from a fire hose. There's just no way we can process all of that effectively without some kind of filtering system.
And that's where critical thinking comes in. It's the filter that helps us separate the signal from the noise.
It helps us prioritize and focus on what really matters.
And the text even dives into the neuroscience behind this, referencing the work of Daniel Kahneman and his concept of System 1 and System 2 thinking. Have you ever heard of those terms?
I have. It's basically like 2 different operating systems running in our brains.
Exactly. System 1 is that fast, intuitive, automatic part of our brain. It's responsible for those gut reactions, those knee-jerk responses.
It's always on, running in the background.
And then there's System 2, the slower, more deliberate, analytical part of our brain. This is the system that's responsible for critical thinking, but it takes conscious effort to engage it.
It's like switching from autopilot to manual mode.
And the key, as the text points out, is learning to recognize when we need to make that switch. Because in many situations, that initial System 1 reaction is not going to serve us well. We need to engage System 2, that critical thinking system.
It's about metacognition, right? Thinking about our own thinking.
Exactly. It's that inner voice that says, hold on a second. Am I just reacting emotionally here? What are the facts? What are my assumptions?
It's that pause that allows us to step back and assess the situation more objectively.
And critical thinkers, they do this all the time. They're constantly questioning assumptions, both their own and those presented to them.
They don't take things at face value.
If someone tells them this investment has returned 20% annually, they immediately start asking questions.
Over what period of time? Compared to what benchmark? What's the risk involved? They want to understand the whole picture.
And it's not just about questioning, it's also about actively seeking out alternative perspectives.
Mm.
Instead of latching onto the first solution that seems reasonable, they force themselves to consider other
They
possibilities.
explore different angles, different approaches.
They challenge their own assumptions, and this helps them to avoid making those premature judgments that can lead to bad decisions.
And the text really emphasizes how important it is to separate our emotional reactions from our logical analysis, especially when we're facing high-stakes situations,
High-stress situations, yeah.
like negotiating a salary for a new job. Instead of just being angry or disappointed by a lower-than-expected initial offer, a critical thinker will take the time to analyze the entire compensation package, the potential for growth, the market value for that role, and then make a more informed and rational decision.
They're not letting their emotions cloud their judgment. And there's a study mentioned in the text that really highlights the real-world benefits of this kind of thinking. It found that individuals who consistently employ critical thinking, especially under pressure, have a 42% financial advantage.
That's a huge difference.
It is. And the encouraging thing is, as the text points out, critical thinking isn't some innate talent that some people have and others don't. It's a skill.
It's a learnable skill.
And it's built on habits that we can all develop. Intellectual humility, a willingness to question, the ability to evaluate evidence objectively, and of course, strong logical reasoning skills.
Speaking of learning, this brings us back to Jaime and his story. His journey really shows that anyone can develop these skills.
He's proof that change is possible.
Absolutely. So what was the turning point for him? What made him start to reevaluate his approach?
It was a moment of true self-awareness, when he finally admitted to himself that his decision-making processes were deeply flawed. And as he describes it, that realization was really unsettling at first.
It can be really uncomfortable to confront those kinds of things about ourselves.
It can, but it was absolutely essential for him to move forward.
It was the catalyst for change.
And he started with something really simple, a 3-minute daily journaling practice. What did he focus on in those journal entries?
He would document every decision he made that day, the assumptions he was operating under, the evidence he considered, and any evidence he might have overlooked or dismissed.
It was like creating a personal feedback loop, a way to see his own thinking patterns more objectively.
And over time, he started to see some recurring patterns in his thinking. He realized he had a tendency to jump to conclusions without enough evidence.
To rely too heavily on his gut feelings.
And there was another one that was really interesting. He found he would often defer to authority figures without actually critically evaluating what they were saying.
He was accepting things as true just because someone he perceived as successful or knowledgeable had said them.
It's easy to fall into that trap.
It is, but Jaime recognized it and he started to change those patterns. And one of the techniques he used was something called steel manning. Have you ever heard of that?
I have. It's a really interesting approach to disagreement.
It's the opposite of straw manning, where you create a weak version of someone's argument just to knock it down.
Right, you're misrepresenting their position.
Exactly. But with steel manning, you make a sincere effort to understand the other person's perspective and articulate their argument in the strongest possible way.
So you're really trying to get to the heart of their reasoning, even if you don't agree with them.
Precisely. And Jaime found that this completely transformed how he approached disagreements, both in his personal life and at work.
It helped him to build stronger relationships because people felt truly heard and respected, even when there were differences of opinion.
And it fostered a more collaborative environment where the best ideas could emerge.
And beyond that, he developed a more systematic approach to evaluating information. He didn't just accept headlines or sound bites at face value anymore.
He was more discerning.
He started going to the original sources, scrutinizing the methodology behind studies, actively seeking out evidence that might contradict his initial assumptions.
He wasn't just looking for information that confirmed his existing beliefs anymore.
And he started consulting with actual experts in their fields, people who had the knowledge and experience to back up their claims.
And all of this more evidence-based approach, directly contributed to the success of his new business venture. He wasn't just relying on gut feelings or a fleeting idea this time.
This time, he had a solid foundation.
He had carefully validated his assumptions, assessed the market, and built his business on a foundation of real customer needs.
And when challenges inevitably arose, which they always do, he was able to face them with a new sense of mental resilience. He had the tools to learn from setbacks and adapt,
He didn't let those challenges derail him.
And he even incorporated mindfulness meditation into his routine, didn't he?
He did. He found that it helped him to create that space between his emotions and his logical thinking.
He could acknowledge his feelings without letting them completely dictate his actions.
And the results were truly remarkable. He not only recovered financially from his earlier losses, but he built a thriving business, strengthened his relationships, and developed a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before.
It's like he had a complete transformation from the inside out.
He did, and one of the most interesting things he discovered was that practicing critical thinking actually made him more empathetic towards other people.
That's really interesting. It challenges the stereotype of critical thinking being cold and detached.
Exactly. It's about understanding both yourself and others on a deeper level.
And the key takeaway from Jamie's story is that this transformation wasn't about changing his personality. It was about cultivating better mental habits, more effective ways of thinking.
And that's something we can all do. So how can our listeners start cultivating these better mental habits? The text introduces the idea of a critical thinking toolkit, a set of practical frameworks that anyone can learn to use.
It's like having a toolbox full of mental models and strategies.
And the text points out that people who consistently use these structured tools make far fewer errors in judgment.
They make better decisions, plain and simple.
They do, but the text also acknowledges that there are some common obstacles that prevent people from actually using these frameworks. What are some of the things that hold people back?
Well, the biggest one is probably time. People feel like they don't have the time to slow down and think things through carefully. They're rushing from one thing to the next, and it feels easier to just go with their gut.
It's that sense of urgency that we all feel.
And there's the emotional aspect, too. It can be uncomfortable to really examine our own thought processes, to admit that we might be wrong or biased.
We all have these ingrained habits, these ways of thinking that we've developed over time, and it takes conscious effort to break free from those familiar patterns.
It does. But the good news is, it's definitely possible. And the text provides some really useful frameworks to help us do just that. One of them is the ideal problem-solving framework.
Ideal. It's a great one. Could you walk us through the steps?
Sure. IDEAL is an acronym, and each letter represents a step in the process. So the first step is to identify the problem. You need to clearly acknowledge that there's a problem that needs to be addressed.
You can't solve a problem if you don't admit that it exists.
Exactly. And then the next step is to define the problem, to articulate it in specific, manageable terms. What exactly are you trying to solve?
You need to be clear about the scope of the problem.
Right. And then you move on to explore potential solutions. This is where you brainstorm, you come up with as many different options as possible without judging them right away.
You're just trying to generate ideas at this stage.
And once you've got a good list of options, you move on to act. You choose the solution that you think is best based on the information you have, and you take action.
You put your plan into motion.
And the final step is to look back and evaluate. You assess the outcomes of your decision, you learn from your experience, and you refine your approach for the future.
You're constantly learning and improving.
Exactly. And IDEAL is a really simple framework, but it's incredibly powerful because it provides a structured approach to problem solving. It helps you to avoid getting stuck in those emotional reactions and to make more rational, well-thought-out decisions.
And for improving your communication skills, there's another great framework in the text called the ACEI method. What does that one involve?
CI is a great tool for communicating your ideas clearly and persuasively. It stands for state, elaborate, exemplify, and illustrate. So the first step is to clearly state your main point. What is the one thing you want your audience to take away?
You're leading with your key message.
And then you elaborate on that point, providing more context and detail to ensure that your audience understands what you mean.
You're giving them the background information they need.
And then you exemplify your point with real-world examples to make it more tangible and relatable. People connect with stories and examples.
It helps to ground your ideas in reality.
And finally, you illustrate your point with an analogy or a visual metaphor. This helps to connect with different learning styles and make your ideas even more memorable.
It's like painting a picture in their minds.
And CI is a really versatile framework. You can use it in presentations, in conversations, even in writing. It helps you to structure your thoughts and communicate more effectively.
And for understanding those leaps in logic that we often make without even realizing it, there's the ladder of inference. What does that framework help us to see?
The ladder of inference is a visual representation of how we move from simply observing data to ultimately taking action. And it's really helpful for identifying where our thinking might go off track.
It breaks down that process into steps.
So the first step is selecting data. We're constantly bombarded with information, but we can only pay attention to a small fraction of it. So we select certain pieces of data based on our beliefs, our experiences, our expectations,
We filter the world through our own lens.
and then we add meaning to that selected data. We interpret it based on our own unique
We
perspective,
give it significance.
and then we make assumptions based on that meaning. We fill in the gaps, we make connections, we create stories,
We draw inferences.
and then based on those assumptions, we draw conclusions.
Right.
We make judgments, we form opinions, we decide what's true and what's not.
And then finally, we take action based on those conclusions. We do something, we say something, we make a choice. And all of this happens in a split second, often without us even being consciously aware of it.
And that's why the ladder of inference is so powerful. It helps us to slow down that process, to become aware of the steps involved, and to identify where our thinking might be flawed.
It forces us to question our assumptions, to look for alternative interpretations, and to make sure our conclusions are actually supported by the evidence.
And the text also provides a framework specifically for making decisions when you don't have all the information you'd like, which is often the case with big life choices. This one's called WRAP.
WRAP, yeah. It's a great one for those tough decisions.
So WRAP stands for widen your options, reality test your assumptions, attain distance before deciding, and prepare to be wrong. And each of these steps is designed to help you make better decisions under conditions of uncertainty.
Because uncertainty is a fact of life.
So the first step, widen your options, is all about resisting that natural urge to narrow down your choices too quickly. It's about brainstorming, exploring different possibilities, even ones that might seem a little crazy at first.
Don't limit yourself.
And then you move on to reality test, your assumptions. This is where you actively seek out information that might prove you wrong. You challenge your own biases, you get feedback from other people, you look for evidence that contradicts your initial beliefs.
You're testing the strength of your assumptions.
And then you attain distance before deciding. This is about creating some emotional separation from the situation, taking some time to cool off if you're feeling overwhelmed or stressed.
You don't want to make a decision when you're in the heat of the moment.
And the final step is to prepare to be wrong. This might seem counterintuitive, but it's really about developing a contingency plan. What will you do if your decision doesn't work out the way you hoped?
You're acknowledging that you don't have a crystal ball.
And by preparing for different possibilities, you're reducing the potential downside risk.
You're being more resilient.
And the text also briefly mentions some common logical fallacies that we often encounter in our personal relationships. Things like ad hominem attacks, false dichotomies, and the slippery slope fallacy. Do those terms sound familiar?
Yeah, they're classics.
So an ad hominem attack is when you attack the person making an argument instead of addressing the argument itself. It's a way of trying to discredit someone without actually engaging with their ideas.
It's a distraction tactic.
And a false dichotomy is when you present a situation as if there are only two options, when in reality there might be many other possibilities.
It's a way of oversimplifying a complex issue.
And the slippery slope fallacy is when you argue that one small action will inevitably lead to a series of increasingly negative consequences, even though there's no real evidence to support that chain of events.
It's a fear-based argument.
And being able to recognize these fallacies can really help us to have more constructive conversations and resolve conflicts more effectively.
It's about communicating more clearly and respectfully, even when we disagree.
Exactly. And the key takeaway about all of these frameworks is that they're not just abstract theories. They're tools that we can use to make tangible improvements in our lives.
They can save us time, help us make better financial decisions, and improve our relationships.
And the text even suggests that we can start seeing noticeable improvements in just a few weeks by consistently applying even one of these frameworks in our daily lives.
It's about making those small, incremental changes that add up to big results over time.
And it specifically recommends Ideal and the Ladder of Inference as good starting points.
Those are both really versatile frameworks that can be applied to a wide range of situations.
But the text also emphasizes that having the right mindset is crucial for consistently using these tools effectively. It's not enough to just know about them. You have to cultivate the underlying beliefs and attitudes that support critical thinking.
It's about developing the right mental habits.
And the text even references a Stanford study that showed how mindfulness meditation, even just 12 minutes a day for 8 weeks, can actually improve analytical reasoning.
It's like strength training for your brain.
And one of the key things that mindfulness helps us with is managing our emotional reactions. Because the reality is, our natural threat response, that fight or flight mechanism, can completely override our best intentions, even when we know better.
It can hijack our thinking.
So, developing a critical thinking mindset is partly about learning to recognize when that threat response is kicking in and to create some space between our emotions and our actions.
It's about taking that pause, that moment of reflection before we react.
And another important aspect of this mindset is embracing failure as a learning opportunity. The text uses the example of Thomas Edison and his countless attempts to invent the light bulb.
He didn't give up. He kept experimenting and learning from his mistakes.
And that's what a critical thinker does. They don't see setbacks as personal failures. They see them as valuable data points, information they can use to improve their approach.
It's about having a growth mindset, the belief that your abilities can be developed through effort and persistence.
And the text highlights Dr. Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset, which has shown that people who believe their intelligence and abilities are malleable tend to be more successful in the long run.
They're more resilient, they're more willing to take risks, and they're more likely to achieve their goals.
And another important aspect of the critical thinking mindset is intellectual humility. This is the recognition that we don't have all the answers, that we might be wrong, and that we can always learn from others.
It's about being open to new information and different perspectives.
And the text poses a really thought-provoking question. What evidence would convince me that I'm wrong about this? If you find it difficult to answer that question, it might be a sign that you're holding on to your beliefs too tightly.
It's a sign that you might be falling into the trap of confirmation bias.
And to counter that, the text encourages us to actively seek out sources and perspectives that challenge our existing views. Don't just read things that reinforce what you already believe. Expose yourself to different ideas, different arguments.
And don't just passively read them, really try to engage with them. Try to understand why someone might hold a different viewpoint.
And the text even suggests creating a personal red team, a group of trusted individuals who think differently than you do and can help you to identify your blind spots.
It's like having your own personal devil's advocate.
And it all comes back to the importance of active listening and empathy. Really trying to understand where the other person is coming from, even if you don't agree with them.
It's about seeing the world through multiple lenses.
And the great thing about cultivating this kind of mindset, as the text points out, is that it becomes self-reinforcing. When you experience how consciously changing your mind based on new evidence leads to better results, you become more comfortable with uncertainty and more open to new information.
It's a virtuous cycle.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the key takeaway is that this isn't just some intellectual exercise. It's about empowering yourself to make better decisions and to live a more fulfilling life.
The text makes a really powerful statement. The quality of our thinking often determines whether we're actively shaping our own destiny or simply being swept along by the currents of circumstance.
And it all starts with that simple question. What assumptions am I making right now? Just taking a moment to ask yourself that question can reveal so much about your own thinking.
And for you, our listener, we challenge you to take action. Choose one of the frameworks we discussed today, maybe IDEAL, CI, or the Ladder of Inference, and consciously apply it to your next big decision.
That one small act of intentionality can be the beginning of a real transformation in how you think and act.
And remember, critical thinking isn't just about making fewer mistakes. It's about unlocking your full potential.
It's about becoming the best version of yourself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.